El Hijo is a top-down stealth game following a young boy desperately trying to survive the harshness of the Wild West. Although packed with challenge and coloured with a beautiful art style, the game, unfortunately, has a hard time keeping itself together throughout much of its runtime. El Hijo is a video game equivalent of a spaghetti western at heart. Everything about its presentation revolves around that. You can tell straight away where the inspiration came from, and it follows a similar narrative style as well. The story follows a mother and her son separated by a quest of vengeance. The game begins with their home, a farm situated in the remote wilderness, being burned down during a bandit attack. Enraged, the mother sets off on a quest to defeat the bandits. Before doing this, she places her son in a monastery for his own protection. It is, however, far from a hospitable place, as children are used for slave labour. Refusing to subject himself to that, he escapes and is set on reuniting with his mother. Okay, I kinda just realised this makes her sound like a bit of an irresponsible parent. She didn't know that the children were used for slave labour. I'm sure if she did, she wouldn't have done that, but I just figured I should probably mention that. Anyway. The majority of your time in the game is spent following the child as he navigates through the monastery as well as the surrounding areas. There are also sections with the mother that are interspersed throughout, but I'll get to those later. El Hijo is heavily reliant on visual storytelling, since there is no dialogue of any kind, and it is actually done really well. There are a few beautifully drawn cutscenes that give a clear indication of what's happening, and there are also character interactions in-game that get the message across distinctly. As for how the story is, it's fine. There's nothing overly complex about it. It is a kids game after all, but that doesn't mean it's not enjoyable. In a way, it's quite charming. Despite my frustrations with the gameplay side of things, which I'll get to in a bit, I was rooting for the kid. Both him and his mother have strong determinations in what they do, and seeing them finally reunite was a fulfilling moment. My favourite aspect of the game overall, though, has to be the art style. It is absolutely gorgeous. There's a very strong and consistent colour scheme that's present throughout the majority of the levels, but it never became stale. There's an obvious cartoonish approach to the visuals, but there are elements of realism present as well. The shadows are a good example of this, and the way they interact with the environment. The contrast they provide just adds an extra layer of depth that makes it look more dynamic. Then you have the attention to detail, which is off the charts. The levels are jam-packed with all kinds of things, depending on the location you're in. The monastery is filled with bookshelves and tables, the wilderness is filled with watchpoints and explosives carried by bandits, and the towns are filled with stalls, pottery, and animals. There's always something to see, and it can actually prove to be distracting at times. In a good way though. This isn't even mentioning just how alive these levels feel. If there's one word I could use to describe them, it would be active. There is always something happening. Some take this a step further, whether that's by having a train being loaded and then setting off, monks leaving a church together, or a massive shootout that you have to navigate through. These were easily the most memorable parts of the game because they were telling their own mini-stories. They were levels that had noticeable progression, and they evolved as you were moving through them. Unfortunately, as good as these levels look, they do start to get repetitive. This is mainly because the game goes on for too long. There's 30 chapters overall, and some of those can be pretty long. As a result, there are moments that aren't necessarily copy and paste, but don't feel that much different from each other either, at least in terms of how they play. It doesn't bring the game down too much, there are other things that do that instead, it's just a minor complaint. At the end of the day, it is the Wild West, there's only so much variation you can have, but there are plenty of environments anyway, so when a place starts to get old, it usually doesn't take long to move onward. My main issues I have with the game pertains to the gameplay mechanics and how everything connects together. This is where things begin to crack quite a bit. Before I go into my critiques, I'll just give a quick overview on what the gameplay loop usually entails. It's a stealth game first and foremost, so the levels are filled with enemies. You must stay out of their line of sight while also moving towards the end of the level. You are given the ability to scan your surroundings to see what an enemy's line of sight looks like, as well as seeing what objects you can interact with and where it is you need to go. This is particularly useful during tense situations where the way forward is unclear. You're also given a selection of tools that you acquire as the game progresses. A slingshot which can destroy things, a toy that can lure enemies away, a smoke bomb that allows you to move discreetly, and a firework that stuns enemies within a radius, as well as destroying tougher objects. All in all, I like these. The tools actually do vary up the gameplay quite a bit, and one of the things El Hijo lets you do is approach situations in your own way. There's usually more than one way to get through an area, and I like that it lets you use your imagination instead of forcing you to follow a specific mindset. It's a game that encourages freedom of choice, and I think that's great. The levels that are most active that I mentioned before bring extra dynamics to the gameplay, whether that's by riding a minecart along a track, or dodging bullets from enemies shooting at each other. My favourite level in the game has you playing as the mother making her way through a moving train. There are standout levels where almost everything feels just right. But there's a few things that let it down, and I'll start with the biggest: the controls. It doesn't have anything to do with the way everything is binded, although that could be better too. It's to do with how responsive it all feels, and that's where it falters significantly. You will get caught plenty of times where it won't really be your fault, it's just the main character taking a while to move properly. On some levels this isn't much of a big deal. It's annoying, but it's not going to screw you over. But when things get a lot more challenging, or if you're traversing claustrophobic environments, this is where it starts to become an actual problem. I'll start with using items. It's way too tricky to aim at a target. The aiming mechanism often snaps in specific directions before you can gain actual control over it. Bear in mind that sometimes you have to move quickly, so by messing around with this you've already lost valuable time. Sometimes you won't even be able to hit things at all for seemingly no obvious reason. When you only have a limited amount of a certain item, doing this is basically shooting yourself in the foot. Or I guess the game is shooting you in the foot. You get what I mean. Then you have crouching. For some reason there's a slight delay when it comes to getting in and out of crouch. I often had to press the button more than once to get it to work as well. I'll also say that it can be difficult to tell when you're actually crouching, which, in a stealth game, is far from ideal. The majority of times that I got caught by an enemy were as a result of me battling the controls. There were moments where it nearly drove me insane. It completely detaches you from the rest of the game and just makes you want to get it over with. This is the majority of the game too. It doesn't change much outside of the sections where you play as the mother. It occasionally varies things up, but these scenarios are few and far between. There is a secondary objective that involves freeing children from their slave labour, but this doesn't garner much reward, except for the times where they sometimes give you equipment. I guess you're supposed to feel good about freeing children, but, I mean, come on, just saying. Put it this way, if you end up annoyed early on in the game, it's only going to go downhill from there. It's a shame because if it weren't for this issue, it would be a lot more pleasing to play, despite its repetitiveness. Unfortunately, I ended up feeling relieved when I finished it. I'm going to be upfront and say that I don't normally enjoy stealth games. I didn't know anything about El Hijo before going in, so if I knew it was a stealth game, I probably wouldn't have touched it. Regardless of that bias, I've tried to be as objective as possible, and what I've discovered is a fun, charming game hindered by painful technical issues. The way it feels to play is just too messy and irritating. When you couple that with the drawn-out nature of the game, it turns into a slog relatively quickly, with only a few moments that freshen things up a bit. That isn't to say it's all bad, however. There are times where the game hits extremely well, where you get glimpses of what it could be if the controls weren't so arduous to work with. Likewise, the story is still good, and on the visual front it knocks everything out of the park. When you weigh the good and the bad together, it's difficult to recommend. If you're a die-hard fan of stealth games, then maybe. I certainly wouldn't buy it at full price. If you're curious about it, I'd get it at a heavy discount. I doubt I'll be coming back to it anytime soon. Thank you for watching. As always, if you enjoyed the review or found it helpful, then be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more like it, then consider subscribing. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.